The morning I caught my mother in her bathrobe, sitting at our kitchen table across from a lawyer I had never met. Signing her name on a stack of papers she quickly slid under a placemat. I knew that the quiet life I had spent 12 years building was already gone. She looked up at me with the face of a woman who had been keeping a secret so long it had become a second heartbeat. And the man standing by the window, the man who had moved into the house next door only 4 months earlier, smiled at me like he already owned the floor under my feet. His name was Nathan. And by the time I understood who he really was, he had a key to my mother's house, a signature on documents that belonged to my family, and a plan that had been 45 years in the making. Let me start at the beginning, because if I only tell you the ending, you will think I was foolish. You will think I should have seen it coming. And maybe you would be right. But I want you to understand how a person can lose everything one small kindness at a time. My name is Claire. I am 34 years old, and I live in a town called Elmwood, which sits about 20 minutes outside Columbus, Ohio. It is the kind of place where people wave from their porches and know your car by the sound of the engine. I grew up on Linden Street in a 2-story house with green shutters. And after my father died, I moved back to be closer to my mother, who still lived there alone. My father, Robert, passed away 6 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, on an ordinary Tuesday in March while he was raking leaves that had survived the winter. He was the steady one in our family. My mother, Diane, was the emotional one, quick to laugh and quick to cry. And after Dad was gone she seemed to shrink into the house like the walls were the only thing holding her upright. So my husband Mark and I made a decision. We sold our little rental across town and bought the house directly next door to my mother, so I could keep an eye on her and she could watch our daughter grow up. Our daughter is Ellie. She was 2 when we moved. She is 8 now. And she calls my mother Gigi. And the 2 of them have a ritual where they bake something together every Sunday afternoon. That ritual is actually how my whole life took the shape it did. Because those Sundays are the reason I opened a bakery. I want you to understand what I built, because it matters for everything that came after. I was never a rich woman. Mark works as a maintenance supervisor for the county, good honest work. But it does not make anyone wealthy. For years I worked as a dental office receptionist. And I hated every minute of it. What I loved was baking. My grandmother taught my mother taught me, and I taught Ellie. And somewhere in those long Sunday afternoons I started to dream. For years ago I took every dollar of savings we had, about 11,000 of it, and I signed a lease on a tiny storefront on Elmwood's Main Street. I called it Linden Lane Bakery, after the street I grew up on. The first year almost killed me. I woke at 3 in the morning. I mixed and proofed and baked until the sun came up. I ran the counter until closing, and then I did the books at my kitchen table until midnight. Mark picked up Ellie from school every day so I could keep the shop open. My mother came in most mornings and worked the register for free, just to be near me. We were poor and exhausted, and we were, I realize now, genuinely happy. By the 4th year the bakery was turning a real profit. We had catering contracts with 2 local companies, a wedding cake side business that Mark called my golden goose, and a line out the door every Saturday. I had almost paid back the small business loan I took in year 2. For the first time in my life I felt like I was standing on solid ground. And then the house next to my mother's, the one on the other side of her. The little brick ranch that had been empty since old Mr. Petrowski went into a care home, went up for rent. And a man moved in. I remember the day clearly. It was a Saturday in late September. I was on my mother's porch drinking coffee while Ellie chased her cat around the yard. And a moving truck pulled up. A man in his 40s climbed out of a gray pickup behind it. He was tall, with graying hair cut neat, a nice jacket, and a smile that seemed to arrive a half second before you expected it. He walked straight across the grass toward us with his hand already out. "You must be the neighbors," he said. "I'm Nathan. Nathan Cole. Looks like I got lucky landing next to the two prettiest porches on the block." My mother laughed the way she used to laugh before my father died. A real laugh, girlish almost. I thought nothing of it. He was charming. He was friendly, he was new in town. He said he was from Cleveland. That he worked in what he called consulting, that he had just gone through a divorce and wanted a quieter life. He said he had always loved small towns. He complimented my mother's flower beds. He asked Ellie the name of her cat and remembered it every single time after that. Over the next few weeks, Nathan became part of the neighborhood the way a stain spreads through fabric. Slowly and then all at once. He mowed my mother's lawn one afternoon without being asked. He fixed the loose railing on her porch steps. He brought her a bag of tomatoes from the farmer's market. He was always around, always helpful, always smiling. Mark liked him. Ellie liked him. My mother, I could see, was blooming under all this attention. And I told myself I was glad. She had been lonely for 6 years. And here was a kind neighbor filling some of that emptiness. But there were things. Small things. The kind of things you notice and then talk yourself out of noticing. The first thing was the way he knew our house. Not the outside. The inside. One evening he was over for dinner, which had already started happening more than I liked. And he got up to use the bathroom before anyone told him where it was. He walked straight down the hall, past the closet, and turned left into the exact right door. When he came back I said, half joking, "You found it okay?" And he said, "Old houses, they all have the same bones. But my mother's house does not have the same bones as other houses. The bathroom is in a strange spot because my father built an addition in the 90s. There was no way to guess. The second thing was a name. One Sunday, my mother called out to Ellie, 'Come here, Bertie,' which is a nickname she has used for Ellie since she was born. And Nathan, from across the yard, went completely still. He looked at my mother with an expression I had never seen on him. Something cracked and hungry underneath all that charm. Then it was gone. And he was smiling again. Later I asked my mother where the nickname Bertie even came from. Because I had never thought about it. She said her mother used to call her that. I filed it away and forgot it, the way you forget things that will one day explain everything. The third thing was the money. My mother has never been secretive about money. After my father died, she showed me all their accounts, made me a signer on her checking. Walked me through her will. She left the house to me and my younger brother Daniel equally. With the understanding that since Danny lived 3 states away and I lived next door, I would likely keep the house and buy him out someday. That was the plan. My mother was not wealthy, but the house was paid off and worth around $300,000. And she had a little over $90,000 in savings from my father's life insurance and their careers. That house and that money were, essentially, the security of my whole family. So in November, when I logged into her checking account to pay her utility bills like I always did, and I saw a withdrawal for $6,000, my stomach dropped. I asked her about it. She got flustered. She said she had loaned it to a friend who was struggling. When I pushed, she snapped at me, which she never did, and told me she was a grown woman who could spend her own money. I backed off. But I started watching the account more closely. In December there was another withdrawal, $4,000 this time. In January, $15,000 gone in 3 months, to a friend she would not name. I want to pause here and tell you that I am not a paranoid person. I am the person who calms everyone else down. But by the middle of January I had a feeling in my chest like a held breath. And every single one of those small strange things was starting to point in the same direction. At the man in the brick ranch with the smile that arrived too early. The night everything changed started with a broken furnace. It was the coldest week of the year. My mother's furnace died, and she called Nathan before she called me. Which stung more than I expected. By the time I walked over, he was already down in her basement with a flashlight, and she was hovering at the top of the stairs with a cup of coffee for him. I went down to see if I could help, and while Nathan had his head in the furnace, I noticed a cardboard box on my mother's storage shelf that had been pulled forward and reopened. It was labeled in my father's handwriting. It said Diane, personal. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe because Nathan glanced at it when I walked past. Just a flick of the eyes, and something in me went cold. While he talked to my mother about pilot lights, I quietly lifted the flaps. Inside were old photos, my parents' wedding, my baby pictures. And underneath those, in a manila envelope soft with age, was a folded document. I did not have time to read it. I heard my mother start down the stairs. So I slid it into the waistband of my jeans under my sweater and put the box back exactly as it was. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I did not read that document until midnight, alone at my kitchen table, with Mark asleep upstairs. It was a certificate of live birth from a hospital in Youngstown, Ohio, dated June of 1981. The mother listed was Diane Marie Hale. My mother's maiden name. She would have been 17. The father was listed as unknown. And there was a second paper clipped behind it, a surrender of parental rights. A form giving up a baby boy for adoption. The baby's given name, before the adoption, was recorded in my mother's own young handwriting. It said Nathan. I sat in my kitchen and I could not breathe. I told myself it was a coincidence. Nathan is a common name. My mother having a baby at 17, a baby she gave up. A baby I had never once heard of in 34 years of being her daughter. That was a shock large enough on its own. But the name. The man next door was named Nathan, he was in his 40s. He had appeared in our lives out of nowhere, he knew the inside of a house he had never lived in. And he went still when my mother called out an old family nickname. I did not sleep that night. In the morning I did something I am not proud of and would do again 100 times. I went online and I paid for a background report on Nathan Cole of Cleveland, Ohio. The report took a day to come back. When it did, the first thing I saw was that Nathan Cole had been born in June of 1981. The second thing I saw was that his birth records traced back to an adoption finalized in Trumbull County, which is where Youngstown is. And the third thing, the thing that made me set my phone down on the counter with shaking hands, was a list of previous addresses and associated names. Nathan Cole had, at various points, also gone by Nathan Weller and Nathan Hale. Hale, my mother's maiden name. He had, at some point in his life, taken it as his own. Everything I had told myself was a coincidence collapsed at once. The man living next door to my mother was her son. The son she gave away at 17 and never told a living soul about. And he had not stumbled into Elmwood by accident. He had found us. He had chosen the house beside her. He had spent months making her love him before she even knew who he was. The question that kept me up the next 3 nights was simple and terrible. If he was her son, and if he had come to reunite with the mother who gave him up, why had he never once said so? Why the lies about consulting in Cleveland and a divorce? Why the secrecy? A man who wanted his mother back would knock on the door and cry and say, "I found you." A man who did what Nathan did wanted something else. I decided to confront my mother. "I want you to know that I plan to be gentle." She was a 17-year-old girl in 1981 who got pregnant and was surely pressured into giving up her baby. And I was not going to make her feel like a criminal for it. But I never got the chance to be gentle, because when I walked into her kitchen that Saturday morning, she was already at the table in her bathrobe, and there was a lawyer sitting across from her. And Nathan was standing by the window, and there were papers sliding under a placemat. "Claire," my mother said, and her voice was thin. "I didn't hear you come in." "What is this?" I said. I was looking at the lawyer, a woman in a blazer with a briefcase open on the floor. "Mom, what are you signing?" Nathan answered before she could. "Just some paperwork," he said smoothly. "Diane's getting her affairs in order. Nothing you need to worry about." And that was the moment the mask slipped. Just for me, just for a second. Because he called her Diane. Not with the warmth of a neighbor but with the ease of a man who had claimed something. And he told me, in my own family's kitchen, what I did and did not need to worry about. I looked at my mother and I said the thing I had promised myself I would say gently. Except it came out flat and cold. "I found the birth certificate. I know he's your son. I know his name." The lawyer's pen stopped. My mother's face fell apart. And Nathan, God help me, Nathan smiled. What happened over the next hour I have played back in my mind 1,000 times. My mother cried and told me the story I had never heard. She was 17, she got pregnant by a boy who left town. Her parents were strict and ashamed, and they sent her to stay with an aunt in Youngstown until the baby came. She held him for 1 hour, she said, 1 single hour. Before they took him away. She named him Nathan because it was the only thing she got to give him. She married my father 4 years later and never told him. She carried it alone for 45 years. And then, she said, this past summer, a man knocked on her door. He said he had found her through the adoption registry and a DNA test. He said he was her son. And she was so overwhelmed with joy and guilt and love that when he asked her to keep it between them for a while, to let them get to know each other privately before telling the rest of the family, she agreed. That was why the lies. That was why the secrecy. He had told her the family would be angry, that I would reject her. That it was safer to keep it quiet until he had earned everyone's trust. I looked at Nathan the whole time she said this. He was watching me the way a card player watches a table. And the money, I said. The $15,000. My mother flinched. Nathan spoke. I've had some setbacks, he said. A business that failed. Debts from the divorce. Diane wanted to help her son get back on his feet. Is that a crime? And this? I pointed at the papers under the placemat. What is she signing today? There was a silence. Then the lawyer, who to her credit looked uncomfortable, said that Mrs. Hale was executing a new will and a transfer on death deed, leaving her home to her son Nathan. The house. My children's Gigi's house. The one next to mine, the one that was supposed to be mine and Danny's. The anchor of my entire family's future. She was signing it over to a man who had walked into her life 8 months earlier wearing a lie for a face. I did not scream. I want you to know that. Everything in me wanted to. But I looked at my mother's broken face and I understood that screaming would only push her further into his arms. So I said, very quietly, Mom, please don't sign anything else today. Please. Just give me 1 week. I'm your daughter. I've been next door for 6 years. He's been here for 8 months. Give me 1 week. And my mother. My beautiful guilty grieving mother looked at me and then looked at him. And Nathan put his hand on her shoulder and said, "Diane. We talked about this. She's going to try to take this away from us. From your son." That word again. Us. My mother signed the papers. I drove home shaking. Mark was in the kitchen, and I told him everything. And he sat down hard in a chair. Then I called my brother Daniel in Colorado. And this is where the story got worse, because Danny already knew. Nathan had reached out to Danny 2 months earlier. He had told Danny his own version. The version where he was the long-lost brother, warm and wronged. And where I, Claire, was the controlling sister who wanted to keep the inheritance for myself and cut everyone else out. Nathan had spent those 2 months slowly poisoning my brother against me over the phone. Playing on every old sibling resentment, every time Danny felt like the family favored me because I stayed close and he moved away. So when I called Danny in a panic that afternoon, my own brother said, "Claire, maybe you should just let Mom be happy. Maybe this is about you not wanting to share." I got off the phone and I understood. Finally and completely, what Nathan was doing. He was not reuniting with a family. He was dismantling one. He had isolated my mother, drained her savings, secured her house, and turned my own brother into a weapon. He was very good at it. It occurred to me, standing in my kitchen, that a man does not get this good at something by doing it once. That was the thought that saved us. The next morning I did not go to the bakery. I called my longtime accountant, a sharp woman named Priya who had helped me set up my business. And I asked her for the name of a good elder law attorney. By that afternoon I was sitting in the office of a lawyer named James Okafor, laying out everything I knew. He listened, took notes, and then he told me 2 things that changed the direction of the whole nightmare. The first thing he told me was that a transfer on death deed can be revoked by the property owner at any time before death, as long as she is competent and not under undue influence. The problem, he said, was proving undue influence, because my mother would insist she was acting freely. But if we could show a pattern, a stranger who lied his way into her life, isolated her from family, and extracted money and property through deception, a court could set the transfers aside. The second thing he told me was the most important. He said, "If this man has done this before, there will be a trail. Con artists are repeat offenders. Find the trail." So I found it. I hired a private investigator named Frank, a retired county detective Mr. Okafor recommended. I gave Frank every name from that background report. Nathan Cole, Nathan Weller, Nathan Hale, and the birth date, and I told him what I suspected. It took him 19 days. I paid for those 19 days out of the bakery's emergency fund. And I did not tell my mother a word. While Frank worked, I did something harder. I kept the peace. I did not fight with my mother. I came to Sunday dinner. I let Ellie keep baking with her Gigi. I even, and this cost me more than I can describe, was polite to Nathan. Because I understood that if I attacked, my mother would choose him, and I would lose my chance to save her. So I smiled at the man who was robbing my family and I waited for Frank to call. Frank called on a Tuesday night. What he had found took my breath away. Nathan Cole had genuinely been born in June of 1981 and adopted out of Trumbull County. That part was true, and it was the true part that made everything else believable. But his adoption records showed he had been given up by a birth mother named Diane Hale. And here was the thing that made my blood run cold and then run hot with something like hope. Nathan had located those records years ago. He had known who his birth mother was for at least a decade. And in that decade, before he ever came to Elmwood, he had done this exact thing before. To another family. Frank had found a woman in Michigan named Sandra. Nathan had appeared in her elderly father's life 4 years earlier, claiming to be a distant relative, and had walked away with $60,000 and a car before the family untangled the lies. Sandra had reported it, but her father refused to press charges because he was ashamed. And Nathan had vanished. Frank had also found a pending civil judgment against a Nathan Weller in Indiana for the same pattern. This was his whole life. He found lonely older people, he studied them. He became the exact person they needed, and he took everything they had. My mother was not his mother's reunion. My mother was his target. And being her actual biological son was simply the strongest hook he had ever gotten to use. I sat with that for a long night. And then I made a decision. I was not going to expose him to my mother with a stack of paperwork. Because she was too deep in guilt and hoped to hear it from me. She would think I forged it, or that I was jealous. Exactly what he had trained her to think. Instead, I called Sandra in Michigan. Sandra agreed to talk to my mother. Not lawyer to lawyer. Not accusation to accusation. Just one woman who had watched her father get destroyed by this man. Talking to another woman about to lose everything. I arranged it carefully. I told my mother that a friend of a friend had a situation she needed advice on. And I asked her to just have coffee with this woman, Sandra, at my kitchen table. My mother, who loved to be needed, agreed. I made sure Nathan was out of town that day. At what he claimed was a consulting job but which Frank confirmed was actually a court date in Indiana. Sandra came. She sat at my table with my mother, and she took out photographs of a man my mother knew as her son. And Sandra told my mother, gently, everything. How he had appeared. How he had charmed. How he had isolated her father from the family. How he had drained the accounts. How the will had been changed. And how, when it was all done and there was nothing left to take, he had simply disappeared, leaving an 80-year-old man who died 2 years later still believing his beloved relative would one day come back. My mother did not want to believe it. She argued. She cried. She said Nathan was different, that he was really her son. That the DNA proved it. And Sandra said the thing that finally cracked the wall. She said, Diane, he probably is your son. That's what makes it work. He's not pretending to be your blood. He's pretending to love you. Ask yourself one thing. In 8 months, has he ever asked you a single question about the day you gave him up? Has he ever wanted to grieve it with you? Or has he only ever wanted things? My mother went very still. And I watched 45 years of guilt and 8 months of manufactured hope drain out of her face. Because she knew the answer. He had never once asked. He had let her carry the guilt. Because her guilt was the lever he pulled. The next 2 weeks were a war. But a quiet one. Mr. Okafor moved fast. Because we could now document a clear pattern of fraud with victims in 3 states. We had grounds. My mother, finally awake to what had been done to her, revoked the transfer on death deed and the new will in front of a notary and 2 witnesses. She wrote a sworn statement describing how Nathan had approached her, sworn her to secrecy, isolated her from her family, and taken money under false pretenses. We turned everything over to the county prosecutor along with Frank's file and Sandra's account. Nathan did not know any of this had happened. As far as he knew. He had won. The deed was signed. The brother was on his side. The daughter had gone quiet. So he came back from Indiana relaxed and smiling. And he came to Sunday dinner one last time. I will never forget his face when he walked into my mother's kitchen and found not just us, but a sheriff's deputy standing in the corner. My mother stood up from her chair. She was shaking, but she stood. "Nathan," she said. "I know about Sandra's father. I know about Indiana. I revoked everything. And I need you to leave my home and never come back." The mask came off completely then. There was no charm left. He looked at her with pure contempt. This woman who had grieved him for 45 years, and he said, "You gave me away like garbage. You don't get to have a happy ending." And my mother, to her everlasting credit, looked her lost son in the eye and said, "You're right. I did a terrible thing when I was 17 and I will carry it forever. But being sorry doesn't mean I have to let you destroy the rest of my children." He was arrested 3 weeks later on charges related to financial exploitation of an elder. With the Michigan and Indiana cases folded in, he took a plea deal. He is currently serving a sentence in an Ohio correctional facility. And he was ordered to pay restitution he will likely never fully repay. We got back about $9,000 of the $15,000 he took. The house was never his. It never would have been. But I want to be honest with you. Because a happy ending that skips the cost is a lie. And I promised you the truth. We did not walk away from this hole. My mother has aged 10 years in one. The guilt of giving up a child, which she had buried for 4 decades, was ripped open and then exploited. And no court ruling fixes that. She sees a counselor now. An older woman who specializes in grief and reunion trauma, and slowly she is learning to separate the real, permanent sorrow of the son she lost from the false story a con man sold her. Some days are good. Some days I find her sitting on her porch looking at the empty brick ranch next door. And I know she is thinking about the 1 hour she held him in 1981. And I do not say anything. I just sit down next to her. My brother Daniel called me a month after the arrest. He was crying. He apologized for every phone call, for believing a stranger over his own sister, for the things he said about me wanting the money. I told him I forgave him. And I mostly meant it. We are rebuilding, but there is a hairline crack in us now that we can both feel. And I do not know if it ever fully closes. That may be the cruelest thing Nathan did. He did not just steal money. He reached into old wounds between a sister and a brother and pulled them open. And even after he was gone, the ache stayed. And me. I lost 19 days of work, thousands of dollars of my bakery's savings on the investigator. And a piece of my faith in my own judgment, because I genuinely liked Nathan in the beginning. I laughed at his jokes. I let him eat at my table. I let him remember my daughter's cat's name. I will carry that with me. The knowledge of how easily a smile that arrives half a second too early can walk right into a family and start taking it apart. The bakery survived. Linden Lane is still open. My mother works the register 3 mornings a week again. And Ellie still bakes with her Gigi on Sundays, and last month a young couple ordered a wedding cake from me and cried when they tasted the sample. And I remembered why I built the thing in the first place. Life closed back over the wound the way water closes over a stone. Not like nothing happened. Like something happened, and we survived it. Here's what I have learned, and it is the thing I most want to leave you with. The people who hurt us the worst are rarely strangers who force their way in. They are the ones we invite, one small kindness at a time. Because they have studied exactly what we are missing. Nathan did not break into my mother's life. She opened the door, because she was lonely and guilty and human. And he had spent his whole miserable life learning how to be the exact key that fit that lock. The warning signs were all there, the too easy charm, the secrecy. The money, the way he isolated her from the people who loved her longest. I almost talked myself out of every single one of them. Because it is easier to doubt yourself than to accept that someone is deceiving the people you love. So trust the small strange feelings. When someone new asks a lonely person to keep a secret from their family, that is not intimacy. That is a cage being built one bar at a time. And when your gut goes cold in a warm room, do not talk yourself out of it. Write it down. Find the trail. The truth is almost always sitting in a document in a basement box, waiting for someone brave enough to open it. My mother made a mistake at 17 that she paid for her whole life. But the deeper lesson is that being sorry for an old wound does not mean you have to let someone reopen it forever. You can grieve what you lost and still protect what you have left. Those two things are allowed to live in the same heart. Let me ask you something before you go, because I have thought about it a lot and I still do not have a clean answer. If you were me, and the con man who tried to destroy your family really was your mother's blood, her actual lost child shaped into a weapon by a hard life you will never fully know, would you have felt any pity for him at all? Or does what he did erase every ounce of it? Tell me honestly in the comments. I have been on both sides of that question at 2 in the morning. And I would like to know where you land.